As some of you may know, I've covered a few Resident Evil titles on this channel. Now I'm using it as a way to tick off the last few Resi games I never got around to, and this video is no different. Now I've played this under the HD re-release on PS4, so join me as I recount my experience playing through Resident Evil Revelations for the first time, what I loved, what I hated, and ultimately, if it's worth your time playing in the 2020s. Resident Evil Revelations first released on the 3DS in February of 2012, 3 years after the release of Resident Evil 5 and 6 months prior to the release of Resident Evil 6. Capcom at the time was riding high off the success of Resident Evil 5, which is still to this day the best-selling Resident Evil game. Fans were more vocal, however, on this new action-heavy gameplay style, and so the goal of Revelations was to bring both new and old audiences together with a hybrid experience. Did they succeed on this lofty ambition, or did it sink into the briny depths? Well, the answer is a little more nuanced. First, let's dive into the plot. Resident Evil isn't known for its plot, however it's actually extremely intricate, with corporate subterfuge, world domination, and evil monologues masking the deep lore the series has to offer for fans that want that. Revelations is no different. Set before the events of Resident Evil 5 and leading directly into the start of that game, Revelations gives us the story we all wanted: how the BSAA amassed its global influence.
Oh my god.
I'll only go into light spoilers here, so don't worry, I'm not going to ruin the experience for anyone that hasn't got round to it yet. 1 year prior to the events of the game, the city of Terra Grigia was a beacon to the world. It showed that by harnessing the power of solar energy with a giant space mirror, they could power an entire city. The terrorist organisation, Veltro, didn't like this, viewing it as a poster child for mankind's moral corruption, and so they decided to unleash a bioterrorist attack. Now all I'm saying is, these guys clearly didn't watch Captain Planet growing up. To contain the outbreak, the Federal Bioterrorism Commission, or the FBC, turned the solar array on the city itself, vaporizing every living thing in what is the biggest disaster since the fall of Raccoon City. Now our story picks up with everyone's favourite master of unlocking, Jill Valentine, and her partner Parker, as they search for the disappearance of Chris Redfield, whose last known coordinates are on an abandoned luxury cruise ship, the Queen Zenobia. Now even though this is the backdrop, the game quickly expands its focus into the true nature of Veltro, the FBC, and how it all links back to Terra Grigia. It's a good plot, get all the usual elements, backstabs galore, guys which so clearly show they're evil from the first moment you see them, and even more scientists who are sacrificed to achieve the next virus. At this point, taking a job as a viral scientist must be the most dead-end job imaginable. But seriously, it's got all the things you want from a Resident Evil story, and it conveys these with good voice acting and performances from the cast. I can't really fault it. It's not the best story in the series, and the lack of a main villain to work up to fight in at the climax does hinder it from achieving the high points it could have otherwise, but it's enjoyable, and that's really all I need from Resident Evil. If you've seen any of my previous Resident Evil reviews, you'd know that fixed camera angles and tank controls make Resident Evil what it is for me. I love the fear of having your vision obscured, the reliance on sound to gauge threats, and the slow loading screens of opening a door, combined with worrying about what items you left the save room with. Do you take more heals and ammo with you to make combat easier but delay progression, or do you leave most of your heavy hitting arsenal and have room for key items? It's that balancing act of pushing on into the unknown. Now, none of this returns in Revelations. So the question is, did they succeed in returning to the horror roots they set out to achieve? Well, they do and they don't. So I'll start with the combat. It's very fluid. The ability to move and shoot at the same time feels more akin to Resident Evil 6 than any of the others. They offset this with having ammo being a rarer commodity than Resident Evil 5 or 6. At least for the first half of the game, this is something you have to be mindful of. And even myself, who is very frugal when I play these games, got the wrong idea to start with, and I found myself having to reload a chapter to ignore enemies, picking my targets to progress. Now combine this with enemy AI that wants to close distance as fast as possible, and you can find yourself getting swarmed if you're not careful. The enemies hit hard and heals can be limited, which ups the tension. Now unfortunately this all falls apart from the halfway point at the very latest. The reason for this is the weapon upgrades. Your guns can all be upgraded with mods which range from damage bonus, increased stun percentage, to giving you a charged attack. In theory, it gives you good reasons to explore, to uncover the mod kits to make your arsenal as deadly as possible. But in reality, the mod kits meant for me, I turned my rifle into a one-shot death machine. It was like having the Magnum at all times, with more ammo than I could ever realistically need. The hardest enemies would go down in a handful of bullets, and when you have that kind of power, nothing becomes a threat. And so the feeling of dread never has a chance to surface. I wish they never introduced them. The first half of the game I actually found challenging, but after I got my rifle and put some upgrades on it, it was a cakewalk. Now I could have chosen not to add my mods and play through under harder conditions, but why would you do that on your first time through? You'd expect enemy numbers to increase, or to really limit down the ammo to make you not want to use your big hitting guns. But this certainly wasn't my experience, and it did dilute the tension. The lack of the item box also means you don't have to worry about prioritizing heals and guns and key items to progress. And this too hurts, as all you have to worry about is getting to the icon on the map, which as I said is more than doable without much trouble. Now I know I've just shit on the combat, but that's not the whole story here. The shooting and movement all feel great, and they reintroduce a dodge command by pressing into or away from the attack and hitting X. This will get you out of the way and you can prepare a counterattack. Now it's an essential skill which bosses and all enemies force you to master. It's really satisfying and makes the more enclosed areas of the map feel fair to the player. Putting the onus on your skill to avoid getting ganked is a big win from me. Exploration is still a major draw of Revelations. Just like other titles, you gradually get keys which open previously inaccessible sections of the map, and this encourages backtracking to find mod kits, guns, and other useful objects away from the main goal. I did enjoy the act of going back through the environment and seeking these out. Not having to worry about my ammo count meant I had no reason to not go off the beaten path, whereas I could see this being more of a harder choice to make without the resources I had at my disposal. The issue with exploration is objects are hidden. Literally. You have a scanner with which you can scan the environment to reveal these items, which are generally ammo or mod kits. Now this is one of the only times across the game you can tell that this was originally developed for the 3DS. Think of it just like the visor scanning on Metroid Prime. Now it's not just the environment that you use the scanner for, you can scan enemies too. Now this fills a meter which at 100% gives you a green herb, so you're encouraged to do this all the time, as you more often than not find at least one hidden resource in a room. The issue with this is that it just isn't satisfying. It feels like a gimmick and doesn't add anything to the game, other than ruining the beautiful presentation with an ugly green filter. Scanning enemies to give you additional intel or files would be way more fun, and feel like the kind of optional task I'd like to do. But when it's basically essential to use all the time, it just feels redundant. The other bugbear I have with Revelations is the map. In the corner of the screen you have a mini-map which is more reminiscent of Metal Gear Solid than anything else, and it works excellently. The issue I have is when you pull up your full map to try and plan a route, it becomes very difficult to see where exactly you are in a given room. Now I'm not a big fan of 3D maps in any game, I find them much more difficult than they need to be. It's generally style over substance. It's a small nitpick, but it is worth a mention. Now where the game fully succeeds in flying colours is certain bosses. Now this is where the creepiness gets ratcheted up to 11, and the game shows its marriage of new and old styles of Resident Evil. Just watch this. comms officer kicked my arse. I hadn't yet upgraded anything to a decent standard. His design is grotesque, and the way he repeats his call before you start the boss fight really makes you feel on edge, and it meets the high bar for the series in terms of bosses. He was incredible. Sure, the fight overall can be summarised by a gank attack with a one-hit killing main boss, but it's the atmosphere this fight evokes. I was genuinely terrified. Now, the boss fight against Rachel was also a great standout moment for me. Seeing her come through the vents as I worked my way towards the cafeteria was fantastic. She wasn't as opposing as the comms officer, but these encounters used sound to really get under your skin in all the best ways. It's a real shame that later bosses are more generic and don't hit the high points of earlier in the game. As mentioned previously, this game is an up-res of a 3DS game, but honestly you wouldn't know it. It just looks great. You'll find the odd texture which looks like it got missed on the up-res treatment, but by and large it certainly isn't a lesser experience, considering the hardware it was designed for. The Queen Zenobia is so reminiscent of the mansion in RE1, and it has a lot of character. It was a real joy walking around it all and soaking the atmosphere in. The thing that blew me away with Revelations is the level of production that went into the game. There are loads of cutscenes, around 90 minutes worth in total. I just never expected that level of quality going into this game, let alone a game which ran on a 3DS cart. All the cutscenes are animated decently and look great for the time. The voice acting and performances of all the characters, which is normally a gripe of mine in Resident Evil, is good for most of the cast. There's just one exception. These guys.
Almost. I had her until the very end, but I lost you near the... Hey! You think I'm a stalker, don't you?
Good God. It's like they walked in straight from a Final Fantasy game. It's so over the top. And not in a comedic way, it's just infuriating. And unfortunately, there's always one in a Resident Evil game.
I can't! No!
Now, one thing to note, the BSAA really have a strange outfit choice when it comes to the women. Now, back in 2013, would I have noticed or even cared that all the girls have either their boobs or arse out? No, not at all. Do I care now? Not really. But it's certainly a sign of the times and how far forward things have moved since then. Music-wise, the themes never seem to stand out like they do in other Resident Evils. Normally it's the safe themes which always are my standouts. And here, the closest we get to that is the weapon box theme, which is great. There is other music featured, but nothing that really elevates the experience. I don't think this necessarily hurts the game. What's there is serviceable, but it's not something that will bring back nostalgia in a handful of years. So overall, I did enjoy my time with Resident Evil Revelations. I probably sound more negative on the game than I truly am. What the game does right, it succeeds, and on such a high bar. The combat is fun and engaging, the environment and presentation of the game is stellar, and the earlier bosses in particular sit up there with some of the greats. It's just a shame that the systems they implemented don't enrich the experience. Weapon mods make the game remarkably easy from the midway point, and exploration is hampered by a scan gimmick. All this pulls it back from achieving the heights it could otherwise hit. Now, I do think it's well worth your time, even today. What I would say is, due to its hybrid nature of the old and new styles, it ensures it's more of a jack of all trades, master of none. I don't think either camp would get the full experience they want from the game, but you'd enjoy your time with it regardless. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, put a like on it, subscribe to the channel for more reviews, and comment below your thoughts on the game. I always try and reply to everyone I can on my channel, and I look forward to hearing from you. Now take care of yourselves, take care of each other. See ya.